Hello, sorcerers! It has been a while. I'm sorry I haven't made a video in a minute, but I'm back this week and I want to talk to you about entrepreneurship. Oh, you were expecting a sourcing topic, weren't you? Stay with me, people. I'm going to frame this conversation about entrepreneurship with my own personal experience of owning a computer store back in 2003. The computer store was called Computer Joey, and I had the business for about 3 years. And it taught me a lot of things about myself, about what I wanted from a career perspective, and what I was physically capable of doing. Spoiler alert, one thing that it didn't teach me how to do was run a successful business because it did not work. So we're gonna get into all of that, but let me start with the backstory of Computer Joey, how it came to be, some of the unique opportunities and problems that bubbled up, and then we will take those lessons and we will extrapolate them for general entrepreneurship. So back in 2002, my cousin and his business partner decided to buy a building, and that building was a multi-unit storefront in Berlin, New Jersey, in downtown Berlin, New Jersey. And my cousin had this idea: instead of just renting out the properties, he wanted to foster multiple businesses and get a piece of it. So they came to me. At that time, I was 22 years old, 23 years old, and they're like, hey man, you're in IT, you do computers, you come to our office constantly to fix our stuff, and you're fixing other people's stuff, and you're doing it for free. Why don't you open a store with us? Why don't you open this business with us? And we can make some money. I said no. I said no multiple times because I had recently started a full-time job after I'd graduated college. I graduated in 2002, and I'd started a full-time job that was very demanding. I was in IT in that job, and I was on call. I was on pager, and I was not sleeping. I was up all night as it was. Now, my cousin, being the smart person that he was, said, hey man, you're not sleeping anyway. Why don't you just be at the store and fix some computers too? It had its own perverse sense of logic. They bought the building. We started to renovate the section that was to become Computer Joey, and that was gonna take a while. We opened on 4th of July, 2004. Let's say that by the time they made closing, it may have taken up to a year to renovate the buildings. They split one section of the storefronts and actually created 3 storefronts instead of 2. So while all that construction was going on and all that renovation, I was going out and making house calls in the local Berlin area to establish the business, to figure out what I was doing, to figure out what the right rates were. So I was testing for close to a year before we physically opened the storefront. Even doing the house calls told me a lot about myself. Number one, I do not like going into people's houses. I kind of knew that about myself, but it was really more for family. But going into a complete stranger's house multiple times a night, that was not something that I enjoyed doing. I got over it. I did what I had to do for the business, but that problem mutated when the storefront opened, because once I had to keep the store open and maintain the store as people were coming in. There was a retail element to it too. I sold parts. Most people didn't buy the parts, but people were coming in and out of the store all the time, and someone had to be there all the time. And my cousin and his partner were there during the day while I was at my other job. But the minute I can get out, the second I could get out of work, they were like, you need to be here because we have other stuff we need to do. And when I eventually got to the store, and when I was in the store, I would have 20 to 30 computers to fix. We were doing decent volume from the minute that we opened. But when people wanted me to go out and do a house call, that I had a bay where I can fix like 6 or 7 computers at any given time. So I was knocking out 15 computers a night. And when I had to go and leave to do a house call, that's 2 hours potentially, or maybe even 3 hours, where I'm only fixing one computer, and it was a problem. I eventually solved that problem with my college buddies. It was a bad economy around 2002, 2003. People don't talk about that recession anymore. They talk about the 2008, 2009 recession, and a lot of my friends were struggling to get real jobs. I got them involved in the business, and I was sending them out to do house calls. It was all kind of working, right? We were making money. We had a growing clientele. We were making clients, I should say. We were bringing in business, but between the cost of the building, some of the other things, the money wasn't necessarily coming back to me. And that was okay, because at the beginning, I was very dedicated to taking the money and investing it back in the business. But between my corporate job And the fact that I was on call 24/7, and for a point, I was the only person supporting a particular function of my corporate job. So I was on call constantly for like 2 years. So I was getting called every night. I was working at the store, and I was very rapidly burning out. 22, 23, 24, 25-year-old Joey was a very grumpy individual. What it taught me about myself is I can work. I have the capability of working and getting a lot of stuff done, but it comes at a cost. General friendliness and personal, and just being a nice person. I definitely was not a very pleasant person to be around during that time. And that was really the crux of me having to make a decision about the business. By the time I got to 26 years old, I had met my now wife, but I just had started dating her. And I'm like, I need to make a decision. I don't have all of this free time. I don't want to be working literally 20 hours a day. Something has to give. And what was giving was the thing that really wasn't making me money, which was the store. So ultimately, I made a decision to close the business, or to leave the business, and then eventually it closed. And luckily for me, because I was working with family, that did not ruin the relationship that I had with my cousin. And we're still very close to this day, and I'm so immensely grateful for that. That was a win. And if we're just talking about getting into business with your family, and that's not necessarily the theme of this particular video, but if that's something that you have an opportunity to do or you're involved with, that's tricky. My cousin is the one that basically invested all of his money, took on all of the risk, and he's leaning on a 22 or 23-year-old. And I was a pretty reliable 22 or 23-year-old. I was a hard worker, but he put his investment in a 22-year-old that didn't know what they wanted to do in life yet, hadn't really, not established in their personal life. I was living out of my trunk. I was sleeping. There was an apartment at the store, so sometimes I would sleep at the store. I would sleep on a dirty couch in the back room of the store. Sometimes I would sleep upstairs with the other business partner. Sometimes when I started dating my wife, I would stay at her apartment, but I was living out of my trunk. And that also played a huge toll on my mental health and my psyche over those 2 or 3 years. And it's not something that I wanted to continue to do. Another issue with going into business with your family is that they view you as someone in the family. They don't necessarily see you as a business person. And to my cousin's defense, I was in my early 20s. I didn't earn the right to be viewed as a business person at that point. But he's a couple years, he's about a decade older than me. And we were like brothers. He was like an older brother. He's still like an older brother to me. He gives me a lot of advice, and he had always given me good advice. So he was viewing me as the kid brother or the kid cousin. And once I started to get a footing in the business and understanding how the computer store worked and how the clientele worked, I started to have my own opinions about how to do things. And he had his own opinions as someone who had a successful business multiple times over at that point on how things should be run from his perspective. And that was a bit of a conflict. When you're going into an entrepreneurship, you really have to figure out what you want out of the business, what your vision for the business is, and you have to be willing to either kill that dream to make the business survive or figure out a way to pivot if something isn't working. And when you have business partners, whether it's family or not, now you're dealing with multiple people, multiple opinions. You may not have the ability to pivot quickly, to change into something else, because you have to accommodate other people's desires, opinions, and thoughts. Entrepreneurship, it's hard to go in alone. Sometimes you may have a partner, and sometimes that partner could be the thing that makes this business successful, that partnership. And sometimes it could be a situation where it's causing some stress because not everybody's on the same page. So if you're not on the same page, if you're not having the same vision about what you want that business to be and how you want it to evolve, you can really run into some problems. My second major point is, when you own a business, when you are an entrepreneur, you are married to that business. I think I've alluded to that with my little story, but if you are not able to be at the business at all times, your business is going to suffer. If you are unable to work at that business on any given day, you are not going to get paid. That's the problem with entrepreneurship, especially small businesses where there's maybe one or two primary people that are doing all the work. If you don't work that day, your customers don't get taken care of. Nobody's reaching out to them. So if you get sick, it causes a lot of stress. I'm in the technology industry. I was in hardcore IT back then. Guess what? I was allowed to go to conferences. I was sent out for training. So if I went to an MCSC certification, which would have helped me in my business, but if I had to go for that certification and I was gone for a week, I think it was actually 2 weeks. If I was gone for 2 weeks, that's going to be a major problem for my business. So that was a very delicate and problematic dance. I'm investing in myself and investing in the business by getting educated, getting training, trying to come up with clientele, better techniques. But if you're gone, you're not talking to your customers. You're not able to satisfy the stuff that's coming in. There's going to be a huge backlog. Some people are lucky. They can bring in additional help. And eventually we did figure out how to do that dance. But in the beginning, nightmare situation. The point is, if you're not fully committed and fully prepared to be married to that business, it's probably going to fail. If you're not fully committed to the idea of being there all the time and eat, sleep, drinking that business, especially the first couple years, it's probably going to fail. And by the third or fourth year of Computer Joey, I was not committed. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to live my life. And that came at the expense of the business ultimately. I couldn't do it all. And my viewpoint was the store wasn't making enough money that I was going to be able to live the same lifestyle as my corporate job. One of them had to go. I went with the money situation. And that leads me to another point. If you're thinking, oh, should I be an entrepreneur? Should I work for a corporation and have a boss? You always have a boss when you're an entrepreneur. Every single customer that walks into your store or every single person that buys your service or product, they are your boss. So if you're someone that's like, oh, I really can't have a boss. I hear that all of the time with entrepreneurships and entrepreneurs. I can't work for somebody else. You are constantly working for someone else. You are working for multiple people in the same day. I'm not one of those people that say the customer is always right. Sometimes they're very, very wrong. And now you're dealing with a situation where you have someone walking into your business and handing you money and saying, give me X, Y, and Z. And you're like, I don't think you should do that, right? For a variety of reasons. I had the luxury, because I had another job, that I could be brutally honest with the customers. If the computer walked in the store, like they walked in and the thing was a piece of junk, I'm like, just throw that thing in the trash. Don't. Like, I could take their money, I could fix it, but I wouldn't do that. The Berlin community where I had the store had an elderly population, or at least the elderly population liked to call me to come in and help them. And, I'd fix the computer and then it's like, go screw in a light bulb for me, help me unclog my toilet while you're here. And I used to do it. I felt bad. And I also didn't charge nearly what I should have. If I'd be at somebody's house for 4 hours, I was like, what are you going to do? You're going to charge grandpa $500 because you've been here for 5 hours? I didn't have it in me. So that's another great point. To some degree, you have to have a killer instinct. It's not to say that you have to be an animal and you should be greed over everything else, but you have to know what your worth is and you have to know how much you should charge, and you can't waver from it, because if you're not getting paid and you're not making money for the hours that you're investing into the business, eventually you're going to get to the spot where you're like, this isn't working for me and I need to cut bait. Another point about entrepreneurship is being agile. Through the duration of Computer Joey and the computer store, as my skill set started to evolve and I started to get more specialized in certain products, I started to develop a more corporate clientele that wanted me on site at their locations. So then it became a situation where, could I make more money not being in the store fixing normal end user computers at $55 a pop? Is it better to go and do these corporate gigs where I can go to somebody's office for 4 hours, I can do more of a corporate billable rate, and I don't have any of the overhead of running a business? There probably was a universe where that could have been a viable business for me, but that's also hard. There's a hustle. Getting corporate clients and having someone let you walk into their building and touch their computer systems off the street, that doesn't happen magically. You have to build trust and clientele, and you have to go to corporate mixers. And I used to be in this thing called Le Tip and BNI. There's all these little business clubs, and I used to go to those things, and they were always at like 6:30 in the morning. So that was a whole other element of the business where you're getting up and trying to network and get clientele. That's also eating into the very minimal sleep time that I had. That's what you do. You got to hustle to get business. And again, this was 20 years ago. I'm sure things have changed. Social media didn't exist back then. Other ways of advertising yourself and getting that hustle didn't exist. So you had to literally show up and trade business cards with people. While I mentioned that this became a financial equation, that made the decision to leave easier. At the end of the day, this necessarily wasn't a money thing for me. It wasn't going in. My family as a whole, they're entrepreneurs. A lot of my dad, my uncles, my cousins, they all started their own businesses successfully. I wanted to be part of the grand tradition of owning my own business and being an entrepreneur. But owning your own business, whether it's a butcher shop, a headhunting business, retail locations, you have to work and it breaks you down. 20 years later, seeing my dad, seeing my uncles in their 70s and working and being entrepreneurs and hustling, they're all breaking down. They're tired, but they also don't know how to relax because they were never allowed to relax. They were never allowed to have hobbies because all they did was focus on their business and work. And I saw that in them. It's one of my great reliefs that I got out when I did, because I would have become that. And I don't think that's a good way to live either. So, and I'm seeing them now starting to enjoy the fruits of their labor way too late in life. But they're trying and they're starting, but that's a thing. If you want your business to succeed, you have to hustle. You have to grind. It becomes all consuming. And you have to decide if that's something that you want. There is most definitely a part of that exists within me today. I definitely work all weekend. I check and communicate and work on my vacations and making sure my employees are okay. I do these videos on my free time, although I've done less. But the point is that I know that exists within me, and that is something that has to exist within you if you want to be an entrepreneur. You can't be one of those people that are going to be like, I'm going to seed some money in a situation. I'm going to go leave it to somebody else. In my experience, that does not work. It never worked. The minute you let it get out of your hands, it all goes to hell. And if you take these lessons and focus more on a corporate setting, I think that applies too. You read books like Larry Bossidy's Execution. There are examples in that book that talk about how these companies are set up for succession plans and how they are designed to grow when this cult of personality around one leader moves on. You would see with GE and Honeywell and some of the other examples in that book, yes, that they survived for 5 or 6 years when the book was written, but all of those companies ultimately ended up suffering. All of those companies ended up going through massive financial problems, and it was all related to when the leader that caused all of that growth leaves and moves on. Eventually it stops and it blows up. Nothing is permanent. And that's another part about owning a business. At some point, it is not going to function. It is going to die. It is not going to survive. It's going to get involved. It's going to acquire. It's going to go out of business. So part of a business life cycle, part of being an entrepreneur is, can I sell this thing? Have I created enough value? Have I created enough of a customer base that I can sell this and get out? And that's okay too. I couldn't, because I didn't do those things successfully. I didn't have enough customers. I didn't have enough clients. There was no value. I want to make sure that I cover that. It's okay to cash out. And that should be part of at least an exit strategy or an exit plan. You should know what your number is to get out. Computer Joey. It's kind of the 20th anniversary. We opened earlier. We opened in 2003, but the storefront didn't open until 2004. And I've just been reminiscing about the store and my experience there, and I've tried to turn it into a lesson for you guys in this video. But if you have questions about it, maybe I didn't hit something. I'm trying not to meander. If you have questions about the experience, if you have questions about the cool logo that also caused a fun conversation at the store, let me know. All right, maybe I could do a part 2, or I can answer some questions about it. But yeah, entrepreneurship. It's a vital, important part of the global economy, the American economy. And entrepreneurship, since the 1970s, is down like 35%. People are not opening businesses where it's harder for them to survive. But at one point, it was the lifeblood of America. So if you're thinking, I'm gonna throw my hat into the ring, I don't want a boss, I don't want to work for somebody else, I want to grind on my own, let me know your thoughts. But again, I'm going to tell you, you always have a boss. Make your peace with that. And thank you for watching this video. Again, leave a comment, leave a like, have a great day, and I'll be back with another video when I come up with another idea. So maybe leave some suggestions in the comments. Take care.